Have you ever wondered how it is that a global economic system was put in place that is so antithetical to human well-being? Well, I'd like to share with you a story that is historically valid and factual that explains how it is that a theory of human nature that is completely ungrounded in science, it's actually in direct contradiction to science, has come to be the dominant paradigm for economic activity in the world today. Now, this theory that I'm alluding to is called the theory of rational action. It's sometimes also called rational choice theory or the rational actor model. And essentially, it says that the foundation of human nature is that we are self-interest maximizers. You could almost think of us as being like robots that calculate our best interest for every decision, where we take, on one hand, the positive things that will come out of a decision, and on the other hand, the negative things, what are called the costs, or the benefits and the costs, and then we weigh them against each other, and somehow we come up with the solution that is going to maximize our utility, or in other words, give us the best ratio of positive to negative in the decision. Now, it turns out that this theory was not developed by behavioral scientists. In fact, it came from the Rand Corporation in the 1940s and 1950s. And it was not developed by psychologists. Instead, it was developed by mathematicians and strategists. And it's helpful to have a little bit of context that the Rand Corporation, which is a nonprofit think tank set up in California, was actually put in place by the Air Force after World War II. The Air Force had gotten a lot of very lucrative defense contracts during World War II to build aircraft and ships to take aircraft out to sea and bombs for the aircraft and so on. And they wanted to have a neutral body, or an organization that appeared to be neutral, that could advocate on their behalf for large defense spending to the Air Force in competition with the Army, the Navy, and the Marines. And so they set up the Rand Corporation to try to secure contracts for the Air Force. And one of the things that came about after World War II ended was the rise of the Cold War and this conflict between, or this economic competition between the Soviet Union on one hand and the United States and Western allies on the other. And a group of mathematicians were hired by the Rand Corporation to explore ways that the Air Force could benefit from this emerging tension between these two players. And they came up with what is now known as game theory. Basically, a group of mathematicians came together and explored strategies, and they created games, or you could call them rules for interaction, that let them create scenarios and run them and test them. And these scenarios were based on assumptions about human nature. So rational choice theory, or the theory of rational action, was developed as part of these game theories being developed by mathematicians at the Rand Corporation in partnership with other places, but really it was the nexus for all that work. And one of those games, rather crudely, was called Fuck You Buddy. Now we know it as the prisoner's dilemma. And it was a scenario where there were two actors competing with each other, where each of them had incomplete information about the other, and they had to decide whether they would cooperate or whether they would not cooperate. And the mathematical solution that was given the best outcome was to basically to lie, to pretend that one was going to cooperate with their opponent and then cheat them at the last minute, to screw them over so that they maintained the best possible situation, where they would not give anything to the other person, but they might trick the other person into giving something to them, which was considered to be the best outcome. Interestingly, the first time that an experiment was run with real human beings to see whether this rational action process would play out, the Rand Corporation was run primarily by researchers who were men, and this was during a time when there was a widespread prejudice that treated women as though they were not rational, and men were. So they did this study where they had the secretaries in their office do this prisoner's dilemma game, and all the women in the office violated the rules of the game and cooperated with each other, sharing information and working out what's now called tit for tat, or the reciprocity strategy, where I help you, you help me. And rather than having this invalidate the theory, the researchers in their prejudice just said, well, women are irrational, so of course they don't follow the rules of rational action, but that doesn't invalidate our theory, it just confirms it. Well, in hindsight, we can see that this actually only confirms the bias of the researchers. But what's interesting is that the theory of rational action was then taken over the next 40 to 50 years to build an entire global economic system based on it, which is laissez-faire economics. It's also called neoclassical economics. The sad thing is that behavioral scientists didn't start questioning the assumptions of rational choice theory for several decades, actually not until the mid-1970s, when a research project was undertaken led by researchers like Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, Paul Slovic, and others. And they set out to question, to do experimental studies to see if the assumptions of rational choice theory were valid. And interestingly, the very first experiments conducted by behavioral scientists, not only did they not support rational choice theory, but they contradicted it and invalidated it in really profound ways. One specific way that they did that, just to give you a sense, is that the mathematics of rational choice theory requires that preferences remain constant across time. It's what's in mathematics is called the non-commutative requirement, that a plus b must always equal b plus a, but if a and b change value or reverse order, then a plus b does not equate to b plus a in the same way. And so the first experiments by psychologists showed that you could reverse people's preferences by changing the way that you frame the question. So you frame the question in one way, and you get people to come out with option A is better than option B. And you frame it a different way that's logically equivalent, but has a different emotional tone to it, and you would get people to change their preference and say they prefer B over A. So the long and short of it is that when behavioral scientists started studying the assumptions underlying rational choice theory, they immediately invalidated it. And actually the first psychologist, and currently the only psychologist, to get a Nobel Prize in economics was Daniel Kahneman for this work. So it's helpful to ask ourselves this question. If we have assumptions about human nature that go into the design of our global institutions, all the way to the level of the emergent global economy, and those assumptions are based on philosophical ideas that are not grounded in fact, and in actuality contradict how real human nature works, then we've got a conundrum. And so what we need to do to remedy that kind of problem is to have what two cognitive scientists, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, call empirically responsible philosophy, which is that you use empirical methods like the scientific studies done by psychologists in the 70s to question the assumptions of your philosophy before you implement them so that you can improve upon your own internal ideological biases. So this is just a quick example of how the story of the rise of rational choice theory should cause us to take caution and be more systematic and rigorous in the methods that we use to determine how we develop our theories of human nature. And another lesson that we can take away from this is that the cognitive and behavioral sciences, studies in psychology and neuroscience, and linguistics, and other fields, can help guide our theory building in philosophy as well. So it actually goes both ways. So there you have it. That's the story of the rise of rational choice theory and how it was establishing a set of presumptions about human nature that were later invalidated by cognitive science. And so now as we move forward and we ask ourselves, how do we build a global economy that works for human beings? We'd better be sure to take the sciences of human nature that are telling us how human beings actually work into consideration as part of our design process. Thank you, and I hope this is useful for you.